What are system archetypes and how are they used as a management control function? Well, generally an archetype is some form of systemic or system of recurring organizational patterns, something that you can depict as a process, generally a loop, if you will. And these archetypes are generally observed and then used for comparison to determine what are causes and variations between expectations and actual performance in the organization. So you are diagramming these processes as part of a system within the organization for this observation and comparison purposes. Now, generally, you diagram these processes or schema into causal loop diagrams, and generally it's nodes where each factor within the system is identified, and then there's links between them with arrows showing directionality, and the links are the points at which the nodes interact with each other, and the arrows may show any deviation in the path between how one node interacts with another, whether it interacts with two subsequent nodes. So once again, it's showing internal organizational processes and any deviations that might happen as far as the path for how, say, information or any form of process such as manufacturing, assembly, things like that take place. So ultimately, you're identifying any actions that take place as part of the process, any resultant delays, and what is the feedback from that loop or process. Okay. Now, in the planning and controlling process, these archetypes are used either as a balancing function or a reinforcing function. One, you identify an outcome from a process, right? And you're trying to make certain that it stays consistent and doesn't vary wildly. So you will balance the extent to which one node is supported or maintained such that it continues to interact in the equivalent manner with subsequent nodes, so it remains balanced. If anything gets out of balance, you adjust any node appropriately to restore the overall system balance. A reinforcement loop is where you're taking the opposite direction. You're trying to add to any given node that you identify as being a contributor to whatever characteristic you desire, whether it's greater output, greater speed, efficiency, things like that. So you're again focusing on the contributing cause of whatever you're looking for, and then you're reinforcing it or trying to build up that node. Okay. Now there are numerous types of system archetypes, many, but some common examples might include a delay system archetype, where you're simply trying to identify whatever's causing individual delays and minimize that effect or function. The limits to growth archetype is where you notice that all activities that are seeking to cause growth are actually having a counter effect. It's kind of the law of diminishing returns, that if you try to fine-tune something too much, any subsequent action to get further performance out of it has diminishing returns and ultimately can actually even hurt performance. Okay, there's the shifting the burden archetype. It's where you're looking at the various nodes and you see variation in one node and you're identifying or treating that, but that's not the underlying cause. That's just a symptom of the problem. The shifting the burden intervener archetype, where you're putting a great deal of emphasis on the interaction with third parties or the intervention of third parties in the process, such as a consultant or an inventor or something like that, to maintain the process that's started. The eroding goals archetype, that's where you get form over function, whereby you're focusing more on maintaining the system than you are actually focusing on achieving the outcome that you desire in the system itself. Escalation systems, that's when you create unnecessary competition or comparison with other entities, which could either be external entities carrying on similar processes or internal entities carry on similar processes, whereby you're trying to mimic whatever they're doing without good reason or cause, and ultimately it can cause a loss of efficiency. Successful to be successful archetype, this is where you create unnecessary competition again that ultimately thwarts overall progress of the organization. And this is between processes or units that carry out processes. Tragedy of commons, when there's a clamoring for resources such as budget or equipment or human resource allocation, that type of thing. Again, creating competition, which ultimately hurts the organization and diminishes that specific finite resource. Fixes that fail, these are temporary fixes or putting band-aids on problems rather than looking at the overall causes. Again, this is quite consistent with the shift to burden archetype, in that you're not treating the underlying cause. You're either treating the symptom, or once again, you're just putting the band-aid on the problem rather than actually trying to address any type of cause whatsoever. Growth and underinvestment. This links the underinvestment in human resources and equipment to low growth. And so these are just some examples of types of archetypes. But the important thing to remember is archetypes are very useful as a control function in that they allow visualization of processes and a method or means of examining those processes with regards to the overall goals and objectives of the organization.